Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Playful Humans podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and my guest this week is Jill Vialet. She is the founder of Playworks. You can find them at playworks.org, where they're helping every kid play every day. And she's the author of Why Play Works, a new book about helping kids, especially at recess, coming out of the pandemic, making sure that we're continuing to get those social interactions and playing in a healthy way every day. I love it. If you are an adult and you feel like you need the same thing, that's what Playful Humans is for. Go to playfulhumans.com, check out our clubhouse, and take a free quiz too. See how playful you are. Here we go. Don't wait for All right, Jill, welcome to the podcast. We like to start with the joke of the week. The joke of the week this week is brought to you by Diet Books. They appeal to a wide audience. Diet Books. What is the best thing about Switzerland, Jill?
I don't know. What is the best thing about Switzerland?
I don't know either, but their flag is a big plus.
Ba-dum-bum.
All right, there we go. That'll get us started. So I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to ask you. I did check out your book, Why Play Works, and thank you for sending that ahead of time so that I got to read it. Lots of fun games and cool activities and ideas to play in there. But I noticed that you started at the beginning talking about the difference between sports and play, because you started really in sports and helping, kids play sports. But there is a big difference, right? Can you help us with that?
Yeah. Well, so Playworks was originally called Sports for Kids. That was the first name. And when we made the shift from being called Sports for Kids to Playworks, it sort of unearthed all these feelings that people had about it. And so I think when you're trying to sort of tease apart the difference, defining play is this really like weirdly challenging thing to do, right? Like it's a little bit like pornography in that you know it when you see it, but like the definition I like is that any activity undertaken for no apparent purpose. And I think with sports, on some very basic level, sports is different because you're trying to win, right? And that does change the essence of it. And I'm sort of struck too. I'm a huge basketball fan, and I watch, I play, I'm slightly obsessed, and I've noticed like there's a qualitative difference when you're watching a player who is like at work, like this is their job, and there's a grind quality to it, and then there are players who just are so caught up in the flow, right? And they are playing. And for me, that's sort of the difference between play and sport on a sort of woo-woo level.
Yeah, I mean, I like that for a couple of reasons. One, I think you're right. When you see athletes, sometimes they're even professionals. We have Patrick Mahomes here in Kansas City for the NFL, and he is running around like he carries his wide receivers off the field on his back, like piggyback rides and like jumping around and like laughing and having a great time. You're like, oh, he's really doing this for fun. The $500 million contract he got was after, he was having fun playing it and winning. And I think you see that too, when there's a difference between professional NBA, college basketball, and then like a pickup game at the rec center. They're playing for different reasons, and they're having, different outcomes and stuff out of that, right?
But even like there's a quality like when like I do think it's something about this. Like I've definitely played pickup games that were a bit of a grind, right? Like you feel like come on, but like there's when that creativity, like and some of it's like the behind the back pass and the like the extra pass and the
running plays instead of like improvising and stuff too, right?
There's
running the offense was never as much fun as playing basketball.
But there's another great quote by Brian Sutton Smith that the opposite of play is not work, the opposite of play is depression. So and sometimes play can be not so fun. Like sometimes play is like anyway. So I just think it's
that's
complicated.
transition here to my next question, which I love to ask everybody. You work a lot for Play for Kids and protecting recess time in our schools, and I mean, really doing amazing work to help recess be a productive part of the school day and things too. But my question for you was, and I ask everybody this, is when does that stop? I mean, do you feel like adults, we should be protecting recess time and things as well? Or is there any difference between Play for Kids and adults?
I really don't think so. Like one of the things too about, it's funny, like if you work professionally in play, sometimes when you, especially going off to conferences related to getting kids to play, sometimes among the least playful activities in my, I'm like, really? It's like, we're going to talk about play?
I've seen
like,
that too.
I'm like, So, so with Playworks, I got into it because as a kid, play was just essential to my being seen and happy and engaged, and wanted to make sure that existed for other kids. I think I've stayed involved with Playworks for the 25 years because of the transformative experience I see it have on the grown-ups that we work with. And so we train our staff by playing with them. Like we practice what we preach. And we have recess in the office when we had an office, and and in general, like I essentially believe that grown-ups are just large children, and all of our needs, we learn to sort of sublimate them a little bit, but everything that we sort of needed as kids, we still need as grown-ups. And I think play is just critical to us building the sort of trust and rapport and engagement that makes human interaction possible.
One more opening question for you here is, did you ever have like a quote real job? Like, did you go serious and then come back to the play side, or were you able to find this right away? I know you've been doing it for a long time now. But...
Yeah, no. My first job out of college was awesome. It was teaching Eskimo kids how to swim up in Alaska through Campfire Boys and Girls. I know. And they would fly me into these like little villages on like Bart's Air, and like the pilot, it was like the plane was held together with duct tape, and the guy always smelled a little bit like Jack Daniels. So you were like, this is really highly sketchy. But when I got back from that and I was trying to figure out like, okay, I gotta get a job kind of thing. I worked like for 10 months being a socially responsible stockbroker and was fairly miserable. Yeah. And so wrote a business plan for my first nonprofit, which was a children's art museum. And so for 10 months, I had like a real job where I had to wear shoes and things. And but then quickly put that off to the side and have not actually had a real job since.
That's so awesome. I am, proud and happy for you that you were able to pull that off. That's amazing. And you mentioned arts, because that was the other one. We didn't hit that when we were talking about sports and play, but that's what I think is the difference is, sports, there's a lot of people you say, it's not a sport if it doesn't have a ball, or, if there's not a winner and a loser. But in play, I think it is more all encompassing, that includes arts and creativity and
music
and crafts, or music, and you can play with almost anything. I know both you and I have read all the books that there are different types of play, and body play and mind play and creativity and social play. But how do you think about it now when you're thinking about kids' recess time? Because I think a lot of adults still think of it like recess when we were kids, that it's, dodgeball or kickball, and you're playing on the playground, and it's very unstructured kind of play, and maybe a little bit of a brutal play sometimes too.
Yeah, no, and I've definitely, people have very strong sort of nostalgic feelings about recess in general. And so I have been the sort of, I've attracted energy with people about like, any adulteration of play is problematic and like evil. And I was like, well, we live in this litigious society, and schools actually are asking for help. And in fact, a lot of schools not reducing recess or considering taking it away, or like the fact that we take away recess from kids when they've been, nuts. But I think that in short though, for me, the key is always volition. Like it counts as recess if kids choose it. And we want to create opportunities for kids to be physically active and run around and engage with one another. But again, if you make kids do it, it's not it's not play. Like, and so whether it's imaginative play or playing board games or drawing or just spacing out and looking at the clouds, I think ultimately the key is kids having choices and being allowed to choose, and then to be the drivers. Like, I think the grown-up role is to create enough structure so that kids understand how the thing works, and then they have the latitude to own that structure and help organize one another. When I don't know, probably when you were growing up too, when I was growing up, we would play outside unsupervised, but it was super mixed age. And I, as like a 7, 8-year-old, I was outside. There were no grownups, but there were these 3 older kids, and I remember their first and last names. And they bossed us around, and they taught us to do rock paper scissors because daylight was burning, and we just want to keep playing. Or they also like. They did a lot of stuff. They also opened up the lids to the sewers for us to climb around inside. So it was kind of sketchy. As a mom, I'm like, but anyway, all of that stuff.
Most of us survived all that, though, right?
You know, like, yeah. But I think thinking about the fact that our society has changed so much, like, how do you create enough structure, like what those older kids provided for us, so that kids can then be drivers, not only of their own recess, but more generally of their own education.
And I know there's even more restrictions now with COVID and security issues and other things that have come up over the last few years in our society. I wanted to ask you maybe what some of the best ideas for that are, because I'm sure there are a ton of people that are craving play or structure, or even just ideas for their kids, right? If they're at home now and they're not at recess and they're still homeschooling, like they're saying, I've never hosted recess before. Like, I play with my kids, but are there certain structures, activities, or games that are more beneficial than others?
Well, I'd say the first thing is to sort of to turn to the creativity of your kids. So inviting kids to co-create the rules, like, and if you think about games as being this thing where there are like rules and rituals and roles, like, there are all these like design levers for your day where like inviting kids to be sort of your coworkers for being at home, right? Like, there they all are. We're all in this together. But similarly, going back to school, you know, the schools that I've seen that are seeming to have the easiest transition's not the right probably word, but a fluid transition are ones where they are engaging the kids in thinking about and holding themselves accountable and responsible to the different sort of best practices, whether that's standing in line or wearing masks or figuring out the social distancing. So I would say, you know, trusting kids' creativity, and even if you're not initially super trusting of it, being willing to suspend disbelief long enough to engage them, because this is how we learn to navigate risk, right? It's the great sort of irony, right? You have to take some risk to learn to mitigate it. And so inviting kids to be your partner is probably the best practice.
Oh, that's cool. And you're right. There are several things around play and stuff that are counterintuitive. Like, you can't force it. And at the same time, like, it needs to be risky, but it needs to be safe too. If you're feeling threatened, you can't play and stuff. So there is a weird balance here that just the magic comes together and it turns into fun at some point. But that was going to be my next question for you too on these activities is, I feel like sometimes there's this pressure to be well-rounded and be like, oh, well, my kid loves to do Lego or painting, but they don't like physical play, or they're only doing sports. They only like things with a ball, and they don't like to do a puzzle, or they won't settle down. And there's this force, I guess, into like your weaknesses rather than playing on the strengths. But I could also see benefits of both and encouraging all different types of play and things. So how do you balance that when you work with kids, of encouraging them to try things maybe they're not good at, so they learn those skills and they get better at them, or they find a new passion, but also the pressure to not, like, you know, specialize them right away. And this kid's a sports thing, he's going to get a scholarship, and so all the other plays they're off. There's a lot of messy issues there.
for sure, it's super complicated. And I guess in general, a sort of infusing a level of like loving, benign neglect parenting with just a little bit of shock and awe parenting. I find if like you can ride that balance, that's a nice, that's sort of, I like avoid, giving parenting advice like the plague. The one thing that we know though about kids is that if you want them to try something, the best way to do it is to do it yourself. So, if you like your kid only wants to read and you want them to go play sports, if you want to go kick the ball around with them, like it's a little bit of practice what you preach. The number one indicator about if a kid's going to be physically active is whether or not their parents are physically active. And so I think the sort of infusing it into your own practices and modeling what you seek. I always love parents who are like, the parents on the sidelines too at like kids soccer games, like run faster. I'm like, do you know how hard that is? I'm always sort of amused by the like, so I just in general, the start with yourself kind of approach just in general for life seems like a good place to go.
Oh, I think that's great too. And it puts some really good boundaries on it because you're right. I think sometimes they're like, oh, well, kids can go all day. Let's just run them to death. Yeah. And you're like, you run to death first.
Right.
Yeah. You show them how to do that.
The other one too, the parents worried about their kids on devices. I'm like, how are you on your device? I'm always like, so we did for a while when the kids were teenagers. And I think it was easier when my kids are kind of young adults now, but like having a basket by the door and everyone had to put their device in the basket. Me too. Because frankly, I'm more so on my device than any of my kids probably. So anyway, yeah.
Well, that's a good one to talk about here for kids, because I do think screen time can be good, but it can also be dangerous here. And I know both you and I have read the books by like Jane McGonigal talking about the power of video games and that is a type of play and engagement. So I'm wondering where you as a recess expert land on devices and screen time.
So I have been asked to slam devices and screen time, and as I played a lot of Zelda in my 20s, so that would be wildly hypocritical. Now, you know what? I think there are great video games, there are great screen games, and there are great games that are outside. There are screen games that are kind of creepy, and there are games you can play outside that can be kind of worrisome, right? So I think a game is a game is a game, and I believe that kids, in general, given the opportunity to be unsupervised outside playing, a lot of them would choose that over being online. There are addictive qualities to it. So I think as a grown-up, you're your kid's parent, not their friend. And so sometimes you have to set boundaries, but that's true about all sorts of things. And so I think a certain amount of common sense, I think a certain amount of imposed separation for all of us around digital devices, like a digital Sabbath, I think makes a lot of sense for all humans, young and old. But I don't think it's right to sort of just slam video games, digital games, especially not if there are no other play alternatives.
Right. I mean, even it's not that like TV is bad or video games are bad. It's that doing them for 6 or 8 hours a day is bad for you. But the same thing is true for anything.
Right. Moderation in all things except moderation. Right.
There you go. So I wanted to give you a chance here just to talk openly about what you think the challenges to childhood play and recess are these days, the nonprofit with Playworks, and why you felt now was the time for the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is such an interesting moment just globally, right? With the pandemic and this moment in American life where there's so much polarization, moment of racial reckoning. It's intense, right? And so when you cast about with all these hardcore serious things going on, it's almost counterintuitive to think that play might hold some of the answers. And so the subtitle of the book is that big changes start small. And one of the sort of the great insights I was hoping to share was that in this moment of dealing with all these big questions, actually cutting ourselves a little slack and starting more playfully actually offers some really concrete ways to move forward. And the most important thing is that we address the things that divide us. And ultimately play is this incredible way to navigate difference. Like play is often, especially in the form of play that is like games, it is a whole model about how you can interact with humans that are, when you're operating at cross purpose, but you're really trying to beat the other person. And that doesn't mean that you disrespect them or that you hate them, or that you actually recognize the extent to which you need them. You don't actually have a game without the opposition. And so that felt to me like a critical piece. With Playworks, when the pandemic hit, we had a staff of over 500 people, and we were doing all the stuff across the country, and suddenly schools were shut down and we had to sort of reorganize, and we contracted significantly. The following year we had a staff closer to 210 people, and so I included myself in the layoffs as CEO. It was time, it was the right thing to do, but it gave me some free time. And so writing the book was my effort to sort of make sense of what I'd learned over those 25 years and to try and figure out how to best articulate those lessons in terms of how we move forward from here.
I think that's cool. And where do you think the state of play is with schools these days? Is recess still under attack, or have people realized that, like, oh, especially now out of the pandemic, we need playtime, we need kids to get back and be social?
So it's a big country, I would say. We're not really we're not really in one, both. And we're really seeing two kind of responses. One is like, oh yeah, people have been through a lot, this has been intense, we need to play together, we need to take good care, we're gonna have to ease back into this. A lot of kids are coming back, and I don't know if you've been in an airport lately, but like I was just on the East Coast and I flew back home, and a lot of grown-ups have lost basic social skills around navigating, like waiting in a line and things that are like, so the fact that our kids have also a little like, how do we do this again? So play is really critical, I think, to reentry. That said, there are also a lot of schools that quite understandably are like, ooh, we need some hardcore academic remediation. Like, we fell behind, we lost 18 months. We gotta grind it. And I understand that impulse. I don't think it's going to be the most effective. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on where playtime fits in and how we do that when schools take that tack.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you brought it back to adults too. Yeah. I'll tell you this, I heard this one funny quote. There was a fight between two guys at the San Diego Padres game, and one guy just got like knocked out. And obviously that's not okay. But the announcer who was showing the clip said, people, like, this is not Twitter. As we go back into the real world, if you say something stupid, you might get punched in the face. Right. And I was like, right. That's an interesting take on it too. Yeah. It's like, oh, we need to learn how to be social with one another and not be anonymous trolls on the internet.
Right. I'm actually teaching at Stanford and a course on play and design, and I'm super psyched. It starts actually tomorrow as the first course, and we were doing a call with all the teaching assistants and the lecturers and stuff like that. And one of the teaching assistants said, well, so, students have had access to emojis and stuff. And so when we go back into the class, how are they going to be able to express? I'm like, wait, emotion?
Human emotion?
Wait, emojis actually, anyway, it was such a funny, like, we've kind of moved away, but it's true that there is something about being able to put a smiley face or like the shorthand, and how do we sort of work those muscles. And that, I don't know, I think it's a funny moment.
Yeah, I saw this really cool thing online this week where a teacher had 6 different emojis on the wall for how they want to be greeted when they come in. So you could do the dance, or you could do the hug, or you can do a handshake or a fist bump, and let them choose. I thought, like, all adults like need that now, because some people still we're never comfortable with the hug. And trying to bring that back, or you're like, do we shake hands now or not? Like, it can be confusing for adults as well. But
it's confusing.
Do you want to play a game?
Yeah, let's play.
All right, we are going to spin our wheel o' games. There are 10 games on here that it could land on. We'll see which one you get. It is 2 truths and a lie.
Right
2 truths and a lie is pretty easy. You say 2 things that are true, 1 that is a lie, and then we'll try and guess which one is which. So I'll go first here.
Okay.
I picked some sports and childhood things for me back in school for you from recess. So number 1, I lettered in 4 varsity sports in high school. Number 2, I was the recess captain in middle school. Or 3, I was in an after-school special on sportsmanship and ethics on PBS.
I'm going to go with the second one not being true because most middle schools don't have recess.
We did have recess at St. Therese Catholic School, but that was the lie. We didn't have a captain or anything, so you got it. I'm really bad at this game. People always guess my lies. All right, your turn.
Okay, this summer I backpacked solo from on the John Muir Trail from Yosemite to the top of Mount Whitney. Number 2, for my 25th birthday, I bungee jumped off this like rickety bridge in Christchurch, New Zealand. And number 3, what did I have? Let's see, for number 3, I was the Miles State champion in Maryland when I was in high school.
Ooh, wow. Those are all good and they all seem plausible for you. So I'm going to say the third one is the lie.
The second one is the lie. I would never ever bungee jump. No way, no how. Nobody, no.
I'm going on vacation this week and I'm thinking about parasailing. I think that's as close as I'm going to get to skydiving or bungee jumping. I feel like tethered from the start feels a little
with water underneath. All good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll let you know how that goes. But awesome. Thank you for playing. You won that one, which means you win a free 30-second commercial here for the book. It's called Why Play Works by Jill Vialet. She spells Violet with an E there and an IA. But yeah.
A V.
E at the end instead of the O. Right? But and an A instead of the O in Violet. But we'll put that in the show notes. You can find it Why Play Works. I'm dyslexic, but I made that super fun. Jill Vialet, tell us about the book.
So the book is got 4 sections. It starts with a really non-academic-y intro to the science and theory behind play. The meat of the book are these 20 big changes that start with play. And then there are sections, ones on really advice, thoughts on what grownups can do to make sure to protect play for kids. And then finally, a game sort of cookbook, recipes on games you can play with groups as small as 2 and as big as 100. So it's intended to be sort of a bridge between theory and practice that makes it clear just how critical play is to not only kids' lives, but to all of us.
I love it. Jill, thank you so much for being on the show. Again, that's Jill Vialet. It is an A instead of the O. That would make it spelled correctly if you're playing the home game. But the website is playworks.org. You can find everything there and find the book Why Play Works wherever you buy a book. You can find Playful Humans at playfulhumans.com. Subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already on your favorite app and take the quiz. Find out how playful you are, what your playful personality type is at playfulhumans.com/quiz. And other than that, go outside and play. What are you still doing here? Go have fun.